So this morning I want to talk about there are lots of ways that, as you know, we can sort of slice and dice human behavior, lots of buckets and baskets we can put it in and ways to understand it and talk about it. And this morning, and obviously, this comes in handy when we're trying to navigate a path or understand the challenges we face. And I want to talk this morning about sort of two big baskets, two sort of overarching concepts in terms of how we are in the world. And these are what are typically known in psychology anyway as survival mode as one mode of being and creative mode the other. And they're sort of seen as, dichotomy, two big baskets into which we can fall one way or the other. And they're not only reflective of our external circumstances, but also our inner world, the inner state of our minds. And each of these baskets, each of these categories, survival and creative, offers unique opportunities, unique challenges, but they're there for us. And I hope to talk this morning from a Buddhist perspective, understanding and balancing these modes, and how doing that can help reduce our suffering and help cultivate a harmonious existence. So let's start with survival mode, and it's pretty much what you would assume. It's a state of being where the primary focus in our lives is on our basic needs, ensuring our safety, making sure that we navigate challenges that might threaten our well-being or our comfort. And typically the survival mode is ruled by urgency, sometimes fear, but certainly the instinct to protect ourselves. And that would include protecting ourselves interpersonally, not where there's real physical danger, but where we experience or perceive there might be relational challenges or threats. And what happens in survival mode, and this is a function of our evolution, is the mind tends to become reactive, kind of shoot from the hip and fairly narrowly focused, because it prioritizes immediate solutions to the threat at the moment over things like longer term growth or higher aspirations. It's really about, what do I have to do right now to jump out of the way of that bus? Or what do I have to do right now to get away from this toxic interaction that I'm in? And so we tend to get tunnel vision when we're in survival. When we're confronted with a threat, real or imagined, we sort of single-mindedly focus on whatever we need to do in that moment to survive. And we've all been there. It's just part of how we function. And it involves a more primitive brain function, sort of lower brain functions, if you will, not so much our higher processes, our thinking brain. And from a Buddhist perspective, survival mode often aligns with the concept of dukkha or suffering. Much suffering takes place in survival mode, because when we're in it, we tend to get entangled in attachment, aversion, and ignorance, the so-called three poisons. When we're in survival mode, we're more likely to be dominated by greed, which is attachment to what we desire, hatred, which is aversion to what we don't like, or fear, and delusion, ignorance about the true nature of reality. And this state of being really perpetuates our cycles of stress and anxiety, and often has us clinging or trying to cling to impermanent conditions or notions for security. It's a way we try to anchor ourselves when we feel threatened. And while survival mode is essential for physical survival, certainly in moments of genuine danger or crisis, and that's why we have to react immediately without trying to think about it. It does become detrimental when it dominates our entire existence, when everything we encounter is seen as a threat, and especially in our relational world. And unfortunately or sadly, some of us live unnecessarily pretty much 24/7 in survival mode. And it really narrows our perspective. It really shrinks our world. It leaves little room for joy, for creativity, for spiritual growth. But it is a fact of life. We become like a river constrained by the walls of a dam. We just get, the thing just shrinks. And what I mean by that is that our energy gets primarily focused on maintaining whatever structure we're in, rather than flowing freely toward the ocean as a river might otherwise do, to stay with that metaphor. Now, let's contrast that with creative mode, which is characterized by openness, expansiveness, connection with others. And I'm not here just talking about artistic expression, although that really is where it also arises, but about engaging with life from a place of curiosity, of inspiration, of boundless potential. The mind, where the mind is free or relatively free, or not dominated at least by constraints of fear and scarcity. And when we're in creative mode, and it's sort of dichotomous, but they can overlap obviously and interplay. But when we're in creative mode, we can explore possibilities, we can take risks, we can imagine new realities, and we can really experience the world in a much more open and receptive way. From a Buddhist perspective, creative mood resonates with the qualities of mindfulness and wisdom that we seek to cultivate. When we are present and attuned to in accepting the impermanent, interconnected nature of existence, we are naturally more in creative mode. That's really where we want to largely be, unless we're under immediate threat. So think of creative mode as characterized in part, at least, by openness, by spaciousness, by a real sense of awe about the world. And that's that openness, that's that spaciousness we talk about. And it arises when we let go of clinging, when we let go of aversion, when we embrace life and the flow of life with equanimity, with compassion. We learn to just roll with the punches, ride the waves. Because in this state, we're not bound by our past conditioning and the narrow constraints of the ego. We're not so worried about just hunkering down in safety mode. It's just not a very pleasant place to be. Now, sometimes, of course, we have to be there. It's necessary for our survival. But in creative mode, we tap into that potential of what sometimes is referred to as Buddha nature, that innate wisdom and creativity that resides in all of us when we can access it, when we're not hunkered down in survival mode, when we're less encumbered by these old habits of mind, by old conditioning that often, constrains us. Creative mode is also deeply tied to our practice of generosity. I mean, think about that for a moment. When we are free from grasping mindset of survival mode, from ego-driven survival mode, we're more inclined to share our resources, our ideas, our energy toward others for the benefit of others. Creativity in this sense becomes an act of service. It becomes a vehicle for reducing suffering in the world. And this is not limited to our individual pursuits. It extends to the collective efforts to build a more harmonious and compassionate world. Now, while survival mode and creative mode may seem like opposites, they are not mutually exclusive. They can complement each other when approached skillfully. And that's the message for this morning. Survival mode, when used wisely, is the foundation for creative mode. So when my needs are met, when I feel safe in the world, when I've eliminated threat, or I've accepted that the threat is not real, that becomes foundation for me. And that needs to be in place, or I'm not going to be able to go into creative mode. So for example, when addressing our basic needs, when creating a sense of safety, that's foundational. We free up the mental and emotional energy to explore higher pursuits in creative mode. So it becomes it becomes a prerequisite for having that security from which to move out into the world more spaciously. Similarly, creative mode can enhance survival mode by inspiring innovative solutions to challenges, to survival challenges. We can think more broadly. We can come up with better strategies for dealing with certainly with interpersonal challenges. to navigate these difficulties with resilience and adaptability, because that's kind of the problem-solving mode, in terms of threats or challenges or interpersonal difficulties. And our Buddhist path teaches us to cultivate mindfulness and discernment so that we can recognize when we're stuck in survival mode rather than being able to move in and out of between survival mode and creative mode. You know, if I want to check in, am I feeling safe now? Am I feeling grounded now? Then I can open to more creative aspects. But I have to have discernment to move back and forth. And this is where the pause and the noticing followed by the pause, I reverse those, becomes essential. This requires that we develop what the Buddha called the paramitas, the perfections, such as patience. Let me just wait a minute and see what happens. Wisdom, ethical conduct. These things, excuse me, help us navigate both modes with skill and balance. The secret is not to get rid of one or the other or have one or the other dominate. The secret is having the capacity to discern how we need to move between the two. You know, with our meditation, we observe our thoughts and emotions without judgments. As I said, we create spaciousness where we can move from reactivity, which is a function of survival mode, into creativity. Survival mode, as I said a few minutes ago, by its very nature, because of our evolution, involves a large component of more primitive brain reactivity, more primitive brain responses. And ultimately, our Buddhist path points to a state that transcends both creative and survival mode to greater freedom. So in other words, in this more awakened state, we're no longer bound by these dualities of fear and inspiration, struggle or ease, self or other. Rather, we dwell in the present moment with full awareness, embracing life as it is without clinging or aversion. One of the dangers of both of these states is that we can cling in either of them. But from the perspective of balance, both survival and creative modes are expressions of the same underlying truth of who we are. It's that interconnected, ever-changing nature of existence. Because when we're operating from this more awakened state, survival mode and creative mode become tools rather than our identity. We're not so identified with one or the other. We engage with survival mode when needed without being consumed by fear and anxiety, fear and scarcity, and we enter creative mode with a sense of joy and purpose, free from attachment to outcomes. One of the dangers of creative mode is we get hooked on the outcomes. In this way, both modes can be vehicles for finding freedom rather than being obstacles. The contrast between survival mode and creative mode highlights this spectrum, just another way of talking about the complexity of the human experience, where we go from instinctual drive for self-preservation, which is very sort of primitive brain, to this inspired pursuit of meaning and connection, which comes from our higher brain functioning. From a Buddhist perspective, both modes have their place, but true freedom lies in our ability to move beyond them, guided by mindfulness, wisdom, and compassion. When we are fully recognizing and embodying the impermanent and interdependent nature of all phenomena, we can navigate the challenges of survival and the opportunities of creativity with grace. We ultimately realize that our true nature is boundless and luminous as human beings. That is the promise that the Buddha offered us. So